welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for coming. It's a cold day in London, and I hope we'll warm you up with some conversation. I'm really delighted, actually, to be here because I've worked with Elisabeth now for, I don't know, 20 odd years, let's say. And as part of the October Gallery, when we put together our I should begin by saying, we're really celebrating the October Gallery's 45th year in London. And this whole show, in a sense, is something to do with that celebration of 45 years of showing a kind of avant-garde art, and I want to talk about that later. But I put together, when we reached our 40th boundary, I put together, with everybody else's help, a book about 40 years of the kind of art that October Gallery has shown. And Elisabeth has been a huge part of that. And at the time, I was aware of this artist called Susanne Kessler, who had shown here in 91, December of 91, I think, which was just before I arrived. So I had never actually met Susanne at that time. And I saw these pictures of, well, there will be, there's, just have a look. It will come. I saw these, not that one, the next, that one. That's the October Gallery in 1991, and that's a Susanne Kessler sculpture that was in this very room and was called the Carousel of Forms. And whilst I was putting together the book, that was the only image I had of Susanne Kessler. So Susanne doesn't really picture too much in the book because I looked at it and thought, no, I got one of this, I've got one of that. So Susanne never really was given the weight that I think she probably deserves in the book. But Susanne has returned, and Susanne and Elisabeth have a long history of working sort of together and sort of apart. And I want today just to get these two to talk about their lives as artists, really. I think the genesis of an artist, what is it that makes an artist? Because I'm not an artist, I put up my hand and say I'm a writer. But I'm intimately involved with an awful lot of artists here. And to write about an artist, you sort of have to learn what makes them tick. And Elisabeth is a long study. I've spent 25 years trying to work out quite what makes her tick, and still haven't quite got there. Susanne is one of those artists who comes and goes and comes and goes. And in short conversations, I get the impression that I know some of the things that make you tick. So I want to just open the two of them to talking about, first of all, those early days when they first met, which was in the 80s, yes, at the Royal College of Art. And I'm going to throw the baton to Elisabeth first. Tell me how you first met Susanne.
You know, we were just discussing, what we were going to say before this talk. And, we reminisced a little bit about the Royal College and how we connected there. And we were located in the Victoria and Albert Museum, and they had big studios at the end that showed that where the entrance was in Exhibition Road. And I think I was on the first floor and Susanne was on the second or third floor. And we kind of connected there. We connected there also because we lived together in Tulse Hill in a hard-to-let property that I happened to have. So that's how we connected at the Royal College. Susanne, do you want to?
Yeah. Actually, I was looking for a room, but that was in the background. First of all, I came to the Royal College, it was 82, and was for a postgraduate. I came from Berlin. I did my years of college in Berlin, and I came to Royal College, so everything was new, everything was very exciting. And I had to settle a little bit in my studio. I got a place. That was not as big as I was used to. In Berlin, they were a little bit more generous. Yeah, okay, I was also a senior student. And then I thought I'd go and have a look around what the students are doing. It was a very different attitude at the college as coming from Berlin, and was very interesting, very international. I was not that used to that because we in West Berlin, were many Germans. There was, I remember, one Turkish and one Czech student, but otherwise many Germans, and to Royal College, everything. There was India, China, South Africa, Europeans, also some Germans. And so I walked around and I went into this mad studio, big studio with 2 people on the scaffolding up and down, and enormous paintings. And one of it was Elisabeth on big, when you look, maybe they come up there in the film, figurative works in oil, diptychs. And I was so curious, and I came to talk with her, and I found out she's from Austria, so of course that was wonderful. We could speak German, that was a help. I loved her Viennese accent, wonderful accent, and I was a little bit impressed. She was so dark and strong and not so talkative. And then somehow it came out that I was looking for a room. We always visited each other, and then I was looking for a room, and she said, you can also live in Talsil. And I was already living in Clapham, so I did everything by bike, and so I thought, okay, Talsil is not that much longer to this, so okay, we do. And so I came to live in a very different situation in this estate building. I never lived in such a building before. And it was like a loft a little bit. No? These windows were like factory windows. I liked very much, the light was great. I could work there at night. We didn't have any, I didn't have any furniture, so it was empty, white. And we lived there for, I think, not the whole time, but like 8 months or so together that I had to leave. And that's the way we knew each other. And we did a lot of things together. Do you remember parts of it?
Yeah,
not all.
I'm going to jump in.
I remember we went to bars together. She was drawing her people, and she was so concentrated in doing that and using it for her work. Instead, I was very much experimenting in this last year. I used it as a launch pad to really go to other areas, away from the wall, away from
the wall, and away from painting in some sense. Yeah.
That was the last years of painting. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll get onto that. So I just want to try to lay some groundwork for this. So, Elisabeth, what was she like to live with?
So glad I have a chronographer, because my memory of that time is extremely sparse. I realized there's so many holes in it. I was so preoccupied with painting. I went to the Royal College and painted for 12 hours a day. I didn't realize what a privilege it was to be able to just have 3 years where you could paint in these fantastic large studios. But that was my world, and I'm sure that was your world at that time.
Yes.
And I remember Peter de Francia, who was the head of the painting department, coming by my space and said, if he had to buy anything from me, he would buy my palette, because that was so thickly encrusted with paint. And the entire floor, which was at least half the size of this gallery, had a layer of paint that thick. Because we spent all day long, on ladders, climbing up to that painting to the top, then scraping it off, repainting it, scraping it off, to get the maximum out of it. So it was a privilege to be there, and we also had the opportunity to have your own model. So for weeks I had my own model that I could, every day, draw and paint as I wanted. So
by your own model, you mean an actual person
who was
there to do what you wanted him to do?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So I could do a whole series of drawings. So I wasn't. So I don't necessarily remember. I'm so thrilled that Susanne is telling me all these details. So apparently, we had this place in Brixton, and I had a room full of books. So full of books that you couldn't enter, apparently. Yeah. And I had a television, and I was the inventor of the future remote control, because I used the bamboo stick to turn on the television across the room. That's what Susanne is telling me.
I can't understand that you forgot it.
In any case, so you know, yeah.
But the
we
only
spent
time we cooked, or I cooked, I tried to cook, I put the kitchen on fire.
So, you know, we sort of lived the art, you know, as an artist, you had a mission in life. You had to produce the best, the most outstanding painting, the newest ideas that you could. And that was very hard in a way.
Yeah, so that's what I want to segue into. This idea that, I mean, both of you come from Austria, you come from Germany, you come to London, first of all. So going to London is something of a choice. That's the first thing. What was it that made London interesting to you? Because you'd already studied in Berlin.
Yeah, but it's
You'd done a lot of, you were already in that sense a trained artist in some sense.
Yes.
But what was it about London that brought you here and made you want to do something?
Yeah, I have this story with London. When I was very, very young, I had a rough time. I was a very rebellious child, and my parents, poor parents, are all dead, had a hard time with me, really. But it couldn't be different. They couldn't understand me. I wanted to become a painter. They didn't understand that. My parents were, you know, were the war generation, I have to say that. And they wanted the best for the children, not a bohemian life. They, you know, I was good at school. They wanted me to become a teacher or a doctor or like my father, an engineer. That was something they saw very much in me. And I said already with 13, I want to become a painter. And then I must have said very soon after, oh, I can also paint on the streets, because I saw once a painter on the street. And he got some money, and the German public was really angry with him because he made this street dirty. So I said, I want to be this painter, and my parents were so that got worse and worse, and then came also the first boyfriend, and he also wanted to become an artist. So that was a tough time. I left school. We ran away from home.
How old?
And we lived in London. We ran away to London. We were even searched for. So it's a very hard story, especially for my parents, because they didn't know what had happened. And I stayed a year in London, and I tried to be an artist, but I could not even make one drawing. And I had to work. We had to work. We had to find, and of course, what work can you do? The most terrible work, because I was a chambermaid once, and I was in the canteen working in factories, and you were the last one there, you know, really, and nobody really paid attention. I tried to sell some little drawings on Portobello Road, also was impossible. You had to work. And every day they brought you to another factory, I remember that. So I worked so many things. And then the whole drama with us young people, between us also, it was getting very complex. And the whole thing ended very badly, also with illnesses. And then after a year, I came back home. My parents were okay, but it was difficult also. But they understood I want to become a painter. That they understood now. So I said, okay, finish the school. I did my 3 A-levels. That got very, very quick. I did that very quick. And then I went to Berlin. I was right away. And then I did all the studies in Berlin. And then I thought, now I apply for this college. I looked always to, because I always passed by the Royal College and the litter boxes. And I want to apply. Maybe they take me for the postgraduate studies. And I got this scholarship, so that was like a dream for me.
Yeah. When you say you studied in Berlin, that was at the art school in Berlin?
Yeah, that was at but the academies, they call it academies in Germany, but in Berlin, in West Berlin, they called it the art college, because the academy was a place of exhibiting. Yes. So that's why there is a different name. Now they call it the UDK, University of Art. In West Berlin, we have 2 in Berlin now, of course, because East and West. That was at my time. It was the time of the wall. It was completely different.
We'll get onto that later. Elisabeth, what was it that made London an interesting place for you to come to?
You know, I came, and I think Susanne had a similar experience. She also
Yeah.
lived in the British zone. Wherever
That's
you were.
right. I lived in that he talked
So
about.
We'll come back to the British zone in a moment. You know,
So I was born in '55. So
we're
Vienna-
all from the 55
So Vienna,
generation.
Vienna
so we all
was
grow up.
occupied for 10 years and split into 4 zones. And we were in the British zone. And my mother always said, "My God, I'm so glad we're in the British zone." That's
Now
all
we're,
she said.
we're talking Vienna here.
Yeah,
yes?
that was Vienna. And then my father's studio, he had a studio, a sublet. They hated, my father hated the bourgeoisie. So they moved, they had no money, they moved there with a duvet only. So he had a sublet of a studio that looked out on what looked like an English park, you know. Although you lived in poverty, you had these grandiose places. It was a whole glass wall with skylights overlooking, could have been St. James's Park or something like this. So I had that English garden and I had the British occupation as guiding lights to bring me to Britain. So when I saw an ad when I was 16, I think in the newspaper, take a language course in Canterbury, you know, I then managed to convince my parents that's what I needed to do. And I went to Canterbury and I saw all the bands like Houghton, etc., you know, became loved the fashion people were wearing here at that time, you know, it was so, yeah, it was like coming to paradise in a way, you know, people were crazy, people were wild. You know, I was wild in Vienna, but I stood out, you know, kind of, you know,
Yes.
look what she's wearing, you know, I was really rebellious and wild. So I did that, so then I came back when I was 17, and when I was 18, I had a similar discussion. I wanted to go and study painting. Already I had been wishing to leave school when I was 16 and study painting. And my parents convinced me otherwise, saying that I wouldn't get a degree. I could only be a guest lecturer,
Lecturer.
you know, listening to that.
Yeah.
So when I was 18, again, I was convinced that I should use my head. And I spent at least 1 month at the university in Vienna. And subsequently, so I left Vienna after 1 month, went to visit my friend in Berlin, not you, but another friend, spent a couple of months there, and then went to Britain somehow, where I already had a boyfriend, and just stayed here. So my parents were devastated, of course, like Susanne's parents. I had suddenly disappeared when I was 18 into Britain. And that's where I stayed. I wanted to study painting, so I somehow managed, you know, had to retake my A-levels because they didn't, because we were not part of the European Union, so they didn't accept
We're still not part
the
of the European Union.
qualifications. So I had to retake them, and then I went to City and Guilds, and then
How many years were you at City
I
and
was
Guilds?
City and Guilds for 4 years, and then. Well, I can tell you one other wild thing. So I graduated from City and Guilds, and I put all my heart and soul and passion into my painting. And when we had the degree show, I graduated with a 2-1. That was, of course, not good enough for me. So I took all the paintings that I had, took them off the walls, and walked out. And then, of course, the next person followed me. They also took all the paintings and walked out. So we were outside, and you know, the teacher of sculpture was begging, you know, for us to stay in the degree show because they couldn't have, you know, people that just leave the degree show. So he said he would introduce me to the Royal College in exchange. It was a deal he made because I really wanted to go to Royal College, and that's how I got to the Royal College. A year later, you had to take a gap. You had to take a gap year there in order to be able to study there. So, you know, again, it had the same reputation that Susanne had already alluded to. There were some great artists who had painted there. It was really the place you wanted to be if you wanted to do a postgraduate.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got rebellious young 16, 17, 18-year-olds.
Very similar stories.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Deciding to go elsewhere, and elsewhere happened to be London, which I think, I mean, you know, London was still very much the kind of the swinging capital of the times. I think we're talking the 80s. We've just gone from, well, we've just gone. Thatcher has just arrived, hasn't she? But London was it was a bit of a wild capital, I think, at the time. There was a lot going on, I think, that we don't necessarily see today. Many things were free. You could go down to the South Bank and there would be free shows going on. So it was very much an artistic place, a theatre, cinema. You came
We went a lot to cinema.
You went a lot to cinema, yeah?
Together also.
Yeah, yeah. What sorts of things?
It was a sad moment in a certain sense because we both liked Fassbinder films, and I think you liked them also very much. And he died in this year, so they made a lot of retrospectives. And I remember, I hope I am not mistaken, that they made it a cinema at Leicester Square. They showed his whole production, many films. And the last one, which was Querelle, and we saw this one also, and there was a full night program, and we saw also, I think we saw also in the Ritzy in Brixton, smoking and eating chocolate cake in the cinema, and we saw these films mainly from Fassbinder, I think.
Okay, so we've got two wild girls in London in the 80s. Now I want just to dig more. Elisabeth's talking about putting paint on the wall, putting paint on canvas, and then scraping it off. What's driving you there? I mean, you want to become an artist, is that right? Is it something that you want to do? Is it something you have an idea of being? What were you after when you were doing this kind of thing? Big, huge canvases. What's going on?
Yeah, so as I said before, I just wanted to reach a point where I had created something new. I took something from the antique, I mixed it with contemporary elements. I was working very large scale, mixed sometimes sand into the painting, create something different, astounding, and particularly work on the figures, see how you could remodel that. Really, I mean, at that point, I think I was just, I don't know whether that's new, but at least I was taking into account a lot of influences from previous painters.
Yeah, give me some of the people who you were thinking about following, breaking away from, stopping being.
Well, I don't know whether I particularly followed painters. I mean, of course, Max Beckmann was revered at the Royal College as an influence, so you can probably see some things in there. But also what was interesting at that time, there was a big show in Berlin called Zeitgeist, which had you had the new wild painting, new figuration. So that came onto the scene. And you had people like from Italy, Francesco Clemente, you had David Saul, you had Julian Schnabel, you had Christopher Lebrun, you had a whole wide range of painters that were working in figuration. And that exhibition was so big, I went there, I still have the catalogue, to see that. So it was something we were discussing at that time. And interestingly enough, Bonito de Oliva, who was the main critic of these artists, coined the word Transvangarde.
We'll get on to
for the artists that were, working between Europe and America on that new figuration. I met him later in a sort of different context when I was playing another character in Rome. I came out like from La Dolce Vita into a party, and he of course wanted to talk to me. But that was much later.
Let me jump from that. 87. Didn't you work with him too later?
Yeah, I worked with him. He was important. We missed out a little bit because I went back to Germany, but then there were the wandering years. Then, meanwhile, I had met also my partner, who was Italian, and lived in Rome. So I was not sure whether I can go to Rome all the time. And I just went for a few months, and then I went back to Germany. I had a big studio in Germany where I could experiment. That was very important for me, big space. And not in Berlin, that was in my hometown, Wuppertal, close to Düsseldorf. And from there on, I was still running around. So I came to Rome, and strangely enough, Bonito de Oliva was a very difficult person, but also a very great person, really, for the artists. He has the eye. He was very. If he saw somebody he liked, and if he saw my carousel, if he saw the big shapes from the wall, then he brought you into the exhibitions. And these were over Italy exhibitions, you know, always with transport, no problem. And then they invited you, you could stay in the hotels, the best hotels and so on. Had a big style. He has a big style, he's still alive. And he wrote two of the most important texts. And the book here I brought is with his text about my work. Yeah. So Achille Bonito Oliva, although he is a difficult and also very vain person, was a very good person for me, and I really think he is one of the great critics in Italy. Yeah. Yeah. And he also did one Biennale of Venice, very wonderful one, and so
coincidentally, he also wrote about William Burroughs. Yes. Yeah, that's when I met him in Rome.
And he's actually very international also, and estimated everywhere.
He's very important as an Italian art critic, a curator. But as Elisabeth has just said, and this is where I think he's important for the gallery as well, is because he has this idea of the trans. He's the man who comes up with the. So he's a very important critic, writing about art. But he comes up with this idea of what he calls Transvangarde. Now that to him.
Transavantgarde.
Transavantgarde.
Transavantgarde. Thank you. Thank you. So. The gallery is often mistaken because the gallery began to think about what is the Transvangarde, and I'll fill in a little bit here on the theory behind that. The idea at this time in the West was that the West had always had the avant-garde. Now, avant-garde artists will think of as people like, obviously, the Cubists were avant-garde. Picasso was avant-garde. The later avant-garde would be people like William Burroughs and Brian Gysin, these kinds of leading-edge, cutting-edge artists who the establishment rejected, and they rejected the establishment, and they were forging new territories. They were finding new things. So that was the avant-garde. The problem for the people in the gallery, when they began to think about what kind of gallery, what kind of art would they like to be showing, was avant-garde artists were basically white, male, European and Americans. There's the odd Russian would be an avant-garde artist, but you couldn't be a Nigerian avant-garde artist, for example. You couldn't be a Filipino avant-garde artist. So the avant-garde was this kind of a self-selecting, exclusive club that Western European, Eurocentric art deemed who was important and everybody else was peripheral. Yeah? It was already obvious that this was, a complete load of hogwash, and that there was very important work going on everywhere else around the world. It's not as though the West had invented art, although they tend to think they did. And other art was ethnic, as it were. So the gallery, when it sets out, realizes that art from all around the world needs to be exposed in the centre of London. And the idea came to show the transcultural avant-garde, which they called the Transvangarde. Now, Achille Oliva's Transavantgardia is often confused with this, but it's quite a different thing, isn't it? He was showing a different kind of new modernist work. Totally different time. Yeah.
But there also one thing we have to think about. If you think about Zeitgeist Ausstellung at 82, there was one woman only in the exhibition. There's Susanne Rosenberg. No, I thought she would have made this big horse painting, and no other woman. So also Transavantgarde of Bonito Oliva, only men. The wild, the wild painting, neo-expressionist painting in Berlin was in the Houghton classes. They were actually the time when I was studying there. They were the students of Houghton, who is an important painter in Germany. Now he has a show in the Kasper Gallery in Berlin. And also only women, although they were very only men, although there were very interesting women in the same class and doing also very neo-expressionistic works. So that fortunately is changing now also, together with what you were saying, art from
first of all, art from all over the place, but also to bring the women artists in and to give them a place where they could also show their own work. And it was a time, it was an iconoclastic time where you're trying to break down the barriers that exist.
Yeah, and then the other thing I would like to say, okay, we were wild. I was especially wild when I was young. But at the time I was at college or studying art, I was wild maybe with my work. It was really hard work, and you were mentioning that. We were focused on our work, and we had to focus on our work because that was our chance, not being at the Royal College, or before also in the college I went to. That was our chance. We had to use it. We had to work really, really hard. And, you know, all this bohemian life people talk about, I haven't had it. I went always to my studio. And, of course, there were some parties and all this. And I only know women who are now in the really part of the contemporary art who had the same kind of consequent working attitude. And that I even think, as a woman, you had to work even more than a man.
That's applied to my mother. She was a doctor in Vienna. She was a refugee there, and she said she had to work 3 times as hard.
Yeah, now very similar. I would say that
she had to take all the shifts that nobody wanted in order to prove her worth. Yeah, so that was that. But I think you made a very interesting observation, but you might have already planned to go into that, is when you came to the Royal College, because you came from Berlin, and you know, you looked at the figurative painting in a different light because you were, you know, familiar with the painting from East Berlin. You know, the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, in November 1989. So we're talking before the Berlin Wall fell. You know, when
exactly. I was
Germany
starting
was
at
still divided.
75. I started to study 75 to 81, and then I had the master year. No, I had it in Berlin, and then I came here. 82, I came here.
Yeah, you see, this is, I'm just going to stop you quickly. This is fascinating to me because you've already done 6 years of very serious study of sculpture, I'm guessing design, painting. You're doing across the board, aren't you?
No, at that time, only painting. I did only painting, drawing, painting, and graphics, lithography and etching. That was my. No, that came later.
But I'm talking about 6 years of study just before you even get to the Royal College, and it's the same with you, Elisabeth. You've done.
You studied 7 years, so did I.
Yeah, 7 years.
7 years
I think
of
7
study.
years is good.
And you still in a sense.
It was a launch pad, you know. From there on, I knew it goes into freedom. And the last year into the Royal College, in the Royal College, was I had to drop certain things. I had to find myself. And here I want to speak really about Peter de Francia. He was a person who really made you find yourself. He had this eye-to-eye talk, you know, and also with a lot of sarcasm and humor, which is nice when the critic comes. That you try to find yourself, and that is the most difficult thing, because your own personal ideas, they are little, you know, they are a little different, only little differences, and to get this out and have the courage to do them. Because first of all, they're kind of miserable what comes out when when you go away from what you can. You know, you can of course figure, you can dominate a painting, but then you start with your own ideas. And this, strange enough, I found in the last year in the Royal College. Although I was first a little bit shocked, as you say, there was so realistic painting like you see in East Berlin, for example. We would have never painted like this in West Berlin because we would have thought this is too Marxistic, Leninistic, Russian style, we would have taken distance to that. We would liked it more free and wild, maybe.
So I'm going to interrupt. So you're saying that West Berlin would be more abstract and so on, and East Berlin would be more figurative and then, in a sense, Russian.
Socialist
realism.
Realism, very realistic. Yes. Figurative was also West Berlin, very figurative, yes.
Because I want to move then to you, Elisabeth, because as I see it at that time, there was also quite a big distinction between the world of abstract art and the world of figurative art. I remember you saying once that at the Royal College you were one or the other. You were never both. When we were talking about Aubrey Williams, you said you were a figurative artist or you were an abstract artist. The two camps didn't really...
See, this is my memory. You know, I might be not completely right there. But yes, so figurative painting and abstract painting, they were distinct forms. So when I first came to the gallery and I saw a painting by Aubrey Williams, that felt strange to me, because it had two things that were taboo to be with each other mixed together. So that's my memory. I painted figurative at that time, but later became abstract. But if you deduct the figure in the middle of the painting, you actually have an abstract painting around it. So, you know.
It's just that there's a good example there. There's a figure lying down, and then around it is this abstraction.
It's a funny one, you know. So, because then another lecturer, I remember, came to me and say, "Hey, why don't you just paint the periphery? You know, paint like you do on the periphery, which is much freer." Which I did come to after I had visited Mexico back in the 90s. I came to London, came to Vienna, and I started painting just the periphery and eliminated the figure in the center. But I don't know whether I still don't know whether that was a good idea, because it kind of deleted the central element. And I could never somehow regain that.
This is Elisabeth, a later abstract piece. You see, Elisabeth, I see your work as precisely that, as having moved from figurative. I remember in some of the early huge paintings there were motorcycles, and there were kind of these machines and things, and then and I have to say that I maybe get to say this. I hope so. This is Elisabeth's work. That I see more recent, as it were, and it's total. It's much more it's almost oriental gestural abstraction. It's almost calligraphic. Thank you, Elspeth. Yeah, and this again, you see. So these are much more mood paintings. There is no, as you say, central figuration at all. Now, you know, I actually like Elisabeth's work, but she doesn't paint as much as I think she should. And this is something, again, I'm trying to link the two of you in two trajectories that go in different directions in some sense. But I see Elisabeth as having moved into abstraction, but your painting, in a sense, is sublimated now. Whereas I think that, Susanne, you've left the college, you've travelled. Both of these artists travelled, which I think is critical to their development. But I think that you went to, tell us a little bit quickly, because we'll try and get us everything in. You travelled to India first, and that again is linked to the Royal College, isn't it?
Yeah, that was linked to the Royal College because I met Indian artists. We became friends, and so the first big journey really outside of Europe, and I think it was the first journey for me outside of Europe was in India, and to see these people. Yes, and it was enriching also this now parts from the Royal College. But for me, the traveling was important, especially when I got invited for a project. And so I traveled for projects in the end. In India later on, I stayed for a year, and I made 5 exhibitions in the 5 big cities. And so I really liked that, to be invited for a project. And we were talking before about that, because I might have given the impression, how did you say, talkative or communicative, you said, you know. But I'm very much a studio worker, and I like to be alone. And I mean, I like you all here, but I'm happy when I'm in a studio. And I could never work with the gallery now, organizing the exhibitions. And I'm admiring Elisabeth, who has this talent too, and developed it to such a class that the way she hangs the thing, I was observing it now with this show. She brings all this now together, all her talents together. That she is an artist is very important also for being now a gallerist manager, because you can, and I wouldn't have been able to do that. So I'm really the person who goes continuously up to now to the studio, and I work daily. And I develop always, so I have this enormous body of work, which is also a problem. What? And I love to do shows, and I do continuously shows. And I hope one day I get it together to make an archive of my work, which is now the problem. But this is so strange that we have this so many similarity, and she who seemed more really alone sometimes with her painting there when I met her first is the person now really who creates all this here. And I'm mainly alone in my studio.
Yeah. Elisabeth, can you thread that one back together?
Well, I think it's interesting when you learn through life who you are, potentially.
Yeah.
So I have my desk in the office of the gallery, and it's right next to the door. So I have endless interruption. But you know, some people like that. They like to have a vast stream of people just rushing by them and, you know, coming through. I don't necessarily have major relationships, but I just love being with the energy of people.
Yes.
So I realized maybe in this talk, whilst we were talking, you know, whilst I was at the colleges, you know, there were always people there. Although I might not have spoken to them so much, I might not remember that much. There were a lot of people there. And I don't make a very good painter in the studio by myself. For me, as I told you, it's a nightmare.
Yeah,
I went to Mexico, painted in a derelict building above the sea. And, you know, from the outside, it looks fabulous. I produced beautiful paintings. You know, the landscape looked great. I looked great. Everything looked great. But my inner being was in a state of, I don't know, emptiness, you know?
Isolation?
Emptiness, yeah. So I like to work with people. That's why I love hanging shows here. You know, I work with artists who work with a lot of assistants, and I think to myself, oh great, you know, if I had maybe followed my calling as an artist, I could have worked like Elenacci with a whole range of assistants who prepare the ground, and then you work with what, you make the final touches on the paintings like the old masters did. And they had, of course, studios full of people. But that kind of easel painting style, if you're a lonely artist in the West, and pour your inner self onto the canvas, I'm so sorry, I can't do that. It's just not, that's why I'm probably not painting. I just find it too hard. I don't know. I'm not that interested to see the result of it.
Although you did in Rome.
I did in Rome, but under duress. I had to produce something. So I don't know. You know, I just haven't. The thing is, you know, I'm on the other hand, you know, I got involved in the gallery, which provided me with a lot of, people, drama,
energy.
A lot of exhibitions, energies, you know, everything I could dream of. You know, it never stops. So, you know, that was really a perfect place to work in. But of course, what it did to my painting is I got so involved in everything else, in addition to which I had 3 children, that painting, you know, started to take a backseat. In particular, the kind of painting where I would have had to retire to a studio by myself.
Yeah.
I mean, the last exhibition here, which is now over 20 years ago, I painted in my kitchen. I had 3 young children there, so at least that was still busy. But it's an interesting one. You know, the idea of we are so different in a way.
And so
you
similar.
know, you come across as very people person, whereas I don't. But we like the opposite.
Yeah. And it's such a enriching, you know, for us. This friendship is very enriching. We have so much similar roots, really. Like we were talking about the British zone. No? I forgot to say, my father was working in the British zone as an engineer. He had to repair the streets of the barracks, you know, in Wuppertal with the British. And so I came there and I listened to the English language, and I liked it so much. And so this childhood or youth memories, and then to come together to London, our similar story. And what touches me so much about our friendship is that Elisabeth follows my work up to now. You know, it's as a colleague, and she likes it. And the way she hang it here was as if she hangs her own work. I have never had such a experience really with the gallery, that they are so involved with your work, and that is because of this very special friendship.
I think let's just try quickly, because there are examples of Susanne and Elisabeth's work in the other room. We don't have them actually here. Can we just quickly talk about the two pieces that you hung first, or that Elisabeth and yourself hung, and then talk about a piece of Elisabeth's, just to give a little introduction to the pieces here that we can see.
Yeah, and
So
there are the two pieces there. It's with the survival letters. I put 4 survival letters, and in the middle, or distributed inside, are this cloth, and there is a map of Jerusalem sewn by it. So I go with I have the paper map, and I go with and I ride with the machine over it, all the streets, and it's this rough sewing over it, and I do that very often. So it's like a mantra, I said once, or like a prayer you do for this ground plan of the holy city, which belongs to so many people refer to, the humanity refers to, especially to the ground, to the archaeology. This interest comes a bit because I live mainly in Rome now, and so I'm very interested in the grounds and in the levels and the cultures which are linked to it. And so in this time now, I worked with the Jerusalem subject from 2013 on, because I was invited for a peace exhibition. So in this moment now, I combine it to the survival letters. I put these 5 prayers of Jerusalem there, and a triangle of where also is a drawing of Jerusalem, the center of Jerusalem. And I might be very impressed by Jerusalem. I don't know whether this is exaggerated, no, but I have lived the important years in a divided city. So I have lived just at a wall, and I knew that we had to think of the same roots, you know. They are so different, like what we were talking about, the different way of painting. We didn't like that, they didn't like that, you know. So there was hatred also between the two. That was not easy with the two Germanys. And so now it's still complicated even now. And then this process, and then of coming together and finding the same roots, I think this impressed me very much for my work also. And you can find barbed wire in it, and you can find limits and frontiers, and all this is my subject now. The last, I'm working since 50 years, so it's also.
So there's a sense in which you're mapping different layers of history, and I like this idea of the wall in Berlin, the wall in you know the holy city is divided and so on.
Yeah,
it's
in zones. It's divided in zones. You know that.
British zone, German zone,
American
zone,
French,
Russian zone. Elisabeth, tell us a little bit about the painting, because there's a lovely story to this one too, isn't there?
Well, I left London in November '89, exactly at the point when the Berlin Wall fell. And I went to Mexico, and I thought, oh my God, is this the right time for me? That Berlin Wall was such a big thing in our lifetime, you know, to me to go to Mexico. In any case, it was already a planned journey, so I went. And somebody had lent me a house right above the sea, about 400 steps up, that was half built, where I was creating a studio. It was Puerto Vallarta at the Pacific Ocean, where The Night of the Iguana was filmed. So it was a Mexican on top and American on the bottom, so you could always traverse the two cultures when you were walking up and down. And so I painted, I was preparing for an exhibition both in Chicago and in London. At that time I had about a 6 months time span that I was going to paint in. And this is one of the paintings I created during that period. It's called Poet for an Afternoon, and it kind of has it has a bull's head, a bull, it refers to a bullfight in an arena. It could be that this was influenced by that play which we performed here many years ago, was Desire Caught by the Tail by Picasso, where the artist plays a bullfighter. But more importantly, I was near the Sierra Madre, where the Huichol Indians lived, and I picked up their symbology. So it has circles that portray the sacred portal near Rika. When you go in, you enter another world. Then it's surrounded by the arena of the bullfight. Then it has the four corners of the world. So it has a lot of symbology in it. This painting was painted in 1990, and then it disappeared. I took it to Chicago, and then it disappeared from that gallery there for a good 35 years, no, maybe 33 years. And I didn't know where it was. It had disappeared. I thought about it recently, and I thought, wouldn't it be great to have that painting? So I was sitting in a cafe in Sharjah, and I got a message on my phone saying, oh, we just found these paintings. And so on it was one was this painting, Poet for an Afternoon, and they had been found by a gallery near Lake Michigan, and they wanted to either sell or return them to me. So eventually we decided that we would ship these paintings back. They got lost in the shipment for a little while, but they arrived a few days before the exhibition. So they made it in time. They made it in time to be with me for this event. They traveled through 35 years. Yeah. And that's the painting that you see hanging there. They found me.
Your paintings came back.
Yeah.
You see, I mean, I think that's just a lovely narrative story, because you have a kind of a flash frozen instant of your 1989 life painting in Puerto Vallarta there, yeah?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to try and tie this wandering conversation together, and then we can open questions from the floor. But you see, I just find that the pair of you are very fascinating to me. It's also great to have both of you, because I think you kind of begin from the same place and then almost go in opposite directions. And I suppose my reflection on that is that you've both been kind of you've both been rebels at an early age. You've gone off, you've gone to London, you meet, as it were, in the Royal College. And then you seem to head in different directions, but you both go wandering off. You off to the Far East, Elisabeth off to the Far West, over to Mexico and places like that. And I suppose the idea is that you're impelled by something of this notion of being an artist or being an artist, yeah? It's the thing that drives you. I think, Elisabeth, you've kind of sublimated, as Susanne was saying, you kind of sublimated your art into showing the art, being an artist who interacts with other artists and puts their art on the walls. And I've seen many artists here in the gallery who have walked into a show that you've hung, and they've been surprised when they've seen their own work, because they've never quite seen it presented like that before. There's this magic that you have with other people's work, but at the expense of your own career as an artist. I think you've kind of I wouldn't say sacrificed, because that's too big a word, but I think you've sublimated your very artistic, creative centre into creating some huge works of art with the works of art of other people, which I find fascinating. And then I see you as wandering around the world with this thread that pure chance puts it together. This wandering, I call it your wandering line of your life, where just the chance meeting of this, that, the other, has created you as much as you created it, your career as an artist, yeah? So I suppose the one question maybe before we finish is, if you hadn't been an artist, what would you have been?
I never had a plan B.
The plan B. That's yeah, exactly. Well, that's as I would have expected it. That had to happen. Yeah. From when you were 16, from when you first wanted to go to London, even earlier. yeah. But you had this idea of what an artist was, and do you think no?
I knew like Picasso and no, first of all Van Gogh, of course.
Van Gogh, yeah.
I wanted to be Van Gogh.
Okay. Yeah. Elizabeth, if you hadn't been an artist curator,
The thing is,
what would you have done?
The problem is, I wouldn't have wanted to go into academia because that didn't, that very structured existence didn't interest me very much. Although in reflection now, I do like engaging with people's minds. So something like on the psychology level or psychotherapy level or psychiatry level, that might have interested me just to explore with other people who they are or where they could go. But this might be a one day idea, until you do it, it might be very different, I might say, I do it anyway. But I do, that's the other thing I do enjoy, exploring the mind, the state of mind. But that's not really that, the state of mind is not really that different from painting because you paint a state of mind.
You paint a state of mind.
Yeah.
Yes.
But you can insert in the arts so much. Also the various experiences. You have children, for example. And also this enters in the arts, can enter in the art. So you can always change it. And nobody told you that you have to paint the same things for the next 50 years, So there is such a vast, I think, we cannot even finish to explore it in a lifetime. So I would have to come back to be an artist again. And
come back as another artist.
I think also that you have such a wide range of work. It's really quite amazing, the body of work that you have and the way you exhibit it. Susanne has exhibited in so many museums, particularly in Germany.
Yeah, particularly in Germany.
And she writes.
And many of my works I haven't exhibited. There's so much work I have never exhibited.
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the differences I see. Elizabeth, we're going to commission from you a new work, which we're going to call Psychiatrist for an Afternoon. And we invite you, Susanne, of course, back as often as possible, because there are so many works that haven't been exhibited yet that we would love to exhibit in the future.
Oh, wow.
And
that'd be wonderful.
with that, let me open it to the floor for any questions.
So I'm very glad you spoke about your work and going over a pattern over and over and over again to reveal the different layers and get to the roots. That's what shamanic power does.
Yeah.
I'm sure of that. It's a certain contact that you keep intensity on for a long period of time until finally it's revealed to you. And I've seen you paint in this with the same attitude. Something comes through you almost. And I wanted to just ask you that process, or if you would be willing to talk about just the process that you go through when you're preparing yourself, your painting, and what happens at that stroke.
I just want to, I give to Susanne in just a second. I just want to touch upon this briefly. So when I was painting, I think I was still at the City and Guilds of London Art School, I did have that experience that I was channeling things that were going through me and coming out the other side. And that's almost, that kind of, it made me slightly crazy at that point. I don't know, because you were suddenly seeing something so different and I didn't have a context I could compare it to. So that I found really interesting, that channeling and that intense focus. I remember once I had a commission and I had to paint it here in the middle of the gallery floor. And you're focused in such a different way. And somebody came by and said, "Oh, you have a phone call, you have to do this." And I said, "Why? Why do you disturb me right here in that really important state of being?" So, it's such being an artist is so different in a sense. But even in theater, it's just so different than doing your sort of more functional tasks, So it's, Even being a curator, unless you hang exhibitions, and being an artist is really quite far apart, Or I always say that art fairs and artists are on the opposite end of the spectrum. Yeah. So, anyway, Susanne, you go. What is your...
A lot of things I do are also very manual. So it's like hours and hours winding the wire around this cord. And people always ask me, do you have helpers? Well, I do have helpers when I do construction. Like, for example, the carousel. I had a technician because there was a motor and machine, and so for other works also. But for these works, I do them myself, because it's really for me a meditation. It's strange because I'm not a patient person, but in these moments, I am patient for weeks. I can be patient to do this, but only in these works. I was not a very patient mother. I also have a child, but in these works I'm really and I think this is because I get into this different state. I need it really. So also that's why I do a lot of stitching now. I did here all the stitching around for hours and hours, and it just gives me it puts the right spirit into the work. Not another person does it. It's not the same thing. It has to be my hands.
Anybody else with anything basically, because I think these two will answer.
Can you become an artist, or you have to be born an artist to be an artist? Because I remember myself, I always loved art and I follow a lot of artists, but I always thought I can never be an artist because I was very bad at art. But now with all this conversation, this idea of can you become an artist, seems to me maybe you can't. Yes, to be a gift.
I think you have to find out why you say, am I good enough, or can I become an artist? Maybe somebody told you, oh, you can't be an artist, but you feel it. So in the moment you feel it, you are. You can, of course. But if it has to be an urge, of course, one has to try. I mean, I know so many people who had to stop it because it was not good for them. And that also is courage, I feel. If somebody says, no, finished, I don't do it any further. I always was impressed by Panamarenko. He was 65, I said, I go on pension now. I have 3 studios full of works. Cannot be shown anymore because so much is too much, and I don't want to go on now the next 20 years. And he stopped it. I'm not sure whether I could do that, but I always admired this attitude, like a functionary. So you have to find out, is it your really urge, or are you afraid? That's what I would
I think it's almost like a calling. That's, yeah. A calling doesn't qualify as to whether you're good or bad at it. It's just something you have. You have to fulfill that. I'm not saying that all artists have a calling. I've seen hundreds of artists that I don't think have a calling. But if you ask what a true artist, I think a true artist does have a calling.
Yeah. I think also looking back to the 80s, you came through at a very interesting time. I'm guessing you before the YBAs here in England. You're coming through just before them, but you're feeding off that situation in the art world at that time, the political thing in the sense of who has been before you. But I think it's very different today, but where you have art schools where you don't have the huge luxury that you're both talking about. You don't get models for free, I'm sure, these days at the Royal College. The computer has changed so many things. The kinds of artists that you were becoming, do you think it's still possible to be that kind of artist?
Yeah. I think that's still possible. It is, of course, different, and because the attitudes are different now. You know, you teach much more marketing at the colleges. You know, because we went out and we didn't know what happens tomorrow. We just went out like this, you know, with 7 years of studies. I don't know how many canvases, how many. What do we do? My poor parents had to take it again on the campus. And then you just were like this. This is a little different now, and it's good like this, that it's a little different. That the professors speak a little bit about it and give you some hints how to do it, to become a free artist. And so that it's different nowadays, I guess. So, but we were free of it, right, Elisabeth?
We were free of
completely.
it. I guess I was lucky because Chile saw it at the end of my Royal College studies, came to see the paintings at the Royal College and asked me to have an exhibition here. And from then evolved the whole range of possibilities. You know.
Could you go to the picture of her work, the color one?
So that's
what I saw at the Royal College.
Without those two blocks in front.
And I was with Flash, Marie Harding, who is also a trustee of the gallery and co-founder.
And an artist.
And an artist. And she was with me when we were looking, we were scouting. We need a fresh, new vibration, and we were looking hard. And she just stood out so much.
Yeah.
And those paintings called to us.
Is that a motorbike on the left?
Yeah, it's a motorbike.
Yeah, I thought
So motorbikes, but it was the scale, the color, and the energy.
So what happened is I received a letter on yellow stationery in my flat in Brixton one day.
From the October Gallery?
From October Gallery. I said, what is October Gallery? I went to Royal College, said, have you heard of October Gallery? Who are they? And it said, would you like to show us your slides? That's how it started. And then I brought some slides here, and then there was a spot I think in August I had an exhibition. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
That we prepared, yeah.
So what was that, 2 months later, 3 months later?
I think, I still remember painting on one painting for this exhibition. I wanted it to be so good. I painted for it 3 months every day, day and night. And it turned out to be the worst painting I made.
So you can't force it.
It's not bad.
Can you give me just, because those are before.
This is before. This is all before. This is in 1983. Yes.
That is the Royal College work.
That's the
right?
Royal College of Art degree show.
So that's the studio you're talking about. It's huge.
Well, that's not the studio. That was in the Albert Hall.
Oh, I see.
Not in the Albert Hall. In the building next to the Albert Hall, the Royal College.
Was the master degree show, right? Was that on
The degree show. The degree
This was
show.
a degree show, yes?
Yeah.
So Elisabeth had this dream start, if you like, to her career, that as soon as she put her degree show up on the walls, a gallery came calling and basically took her off the market.
But that actually was quite good at that time, because of course when you just come out of the Royal College, all the art papers were interested. So I had little reviews and listings and little call-outs from all the different art papers, where there was Art Monthly and Art Review and Art something. Little did they know I would then later I got involved in October Gallery.
That's right.
But I still have those press clippings from the time. But I don't. Well, what happened to you?
Difficult, I think. First I went to traveling again. You know, I went to New York because I thought maybe that's my place, and I wanted to settle there, and that was very difficult, of course. So I stayed some month, and then I also got a letter from a smaller museum close to Wuppertal that I could make if I want a show there. And so I thought maybe that is now the right moment. So that was my first show in Solingen in the Klingen Museum, and it was a museum's show, and I showed elder work before the Royal College and the Royal College work, paintings, only paintings. That was the first show I had. Before I had forgot that. In the time of the Royal College, there was the Goethe Institute made a show of the scholarship holders, the German academic scholarship. I got this, the AAD. And we were, distributed in various colleges, and with me was Renate Wittmann. She was then later a partner of Barry Flanagan. So I once worked also in his studio. They have children together. She and Nanne Meyer and Axel Hütte and me, I think that was all. We had a show in the Goethe Institute. That was a very important first group show I made.
Who was
So that was in '83.
Who was the curator? Who was the curator of that show?
The curator was Edoardo Paolozzi. I thought he's Italian, but he was English, but by Italian. But I found out later, he was also a professor in Germany in the Academy of Munich. And he was our curator, wonderful, invited us to his studio. So that was a little high point, also came out of the show.
Yeah, it came out of this career show. Well, I think maybe we wrap it up and we can talk individually and collectively later. But I thought we could finish on these are the two artists. The artist portrait of the artist as a young woman. There are one
at the time.
Susanne on the left. And Elisabeth on the right, and now that you can see the colour, because you can see the motorbike, so that's actually that picture we're just looking at behind you, isn't it? So this is the two of them at the time they were about to head out into the world, and now 4 decades later, you're still together.
Yes.
With a huge wealth of experience behind you.
I must say, very wonderful story. It's very special also. No, I hear rarely such a story with colleagues that they keep so close and they made such a different career and went into different, and that for me is very positive.
That for me is the wandering line.
The wandering line.
Thank you very much. Thank you.